So, I've talked about the numbers, and we've talked about a few issues with it. Now let's take a case study and put it into the real world and sort of try and make this feel a bit more real. And also, now I'll start talking to you about solutions about inheritance tax. So, Mr. and Mrs. Jones are both age 70, they're in good health, they have a house worth £750,000, they have a healthy savings fund that's invested of £550,000, and they have £200,000 that they want to spend on holidays. Maybe she's always wanted a certain type of Range Rover. Whatever it may be, they're going to spend it on that. However, if they were to pass away tomorrow, on their estate of 1.5 million, this is their tax bill. So their tax bill, you can see they each benefit from having a personal allowance of £325,000. Now, because they've done a will and they're leaving their house to their children, they also benefit from the residential nil rate band. So they each have £100,000 additional. That leaves £650,000 that will be taxed at 40%. So their bill that their children are going to have to pay is £260,000. That is a huge bill. Now, how do we get around the problem of solving a £260,000 bill? Well, there's three main types of trusts I'm going to talk to you about. First of all, a discounted gift trust, then a wealth preservation trust, and then a life assurance trust, and how they all work. Now, the problem is, with the first two types of trust, we physically have to put something into them, and that has to be money. So where do we get the money from, and how does it work? Now, many of you in the room will have ISAs, because ISAs are absolutely fantastic vehicles when you are building. The problem with ISAs is you cannot put them into a trust. And therefore, when it comes to inheritance tax, Mr. and Mrs. Jones's £300,000 ISA portfolio, which makes up part of their £650,000 that's going to be taxed, is only worth £180,000 because it's going to lose 40% of it. 40% is going to go to HMRC. So therefore, it's not tax efficient to have an ISA when you're trying to pass money down. If that's the key concern, especially when it comes to inheritance tax, we need to have a look at what we do. So what we can do is we can sell the ISA portfolio, invest it into a trust, and then we'll invest that into a certain type of investment bond. You retain access to the income, and after 7 years, it's outside of your estate. Now that type of idea is actually what we're creating there is a discounted gift trust. Now a discounted gift trust has aims of giving away capital, but you still benefit from it. And you still benefit from it because you receive an income. So how does that work? Well, Mr. and Mrs. Jones make a gift of money. Now it has to be money. You can't put property or anything like that into these types of trusts. So we're putting money into this trust. This money itself is then put into a trust box, which is the discounted gift trust. That is then in turn will purchase an investment bond. And the bond will then give us the growth that we need to pay the income. Now, it's called a discounted gift trust for a reason. I'll get to you in a moment what the discount means. But on day one, an amount will fall outside of your estate. Then after the remaining 7 years, the rest of it will come out of your estate. And after 7 years, you've saved 40% tax on anything that you put into it. And you get to take an income from it for the rest of your life. So for every £100,000, after 7 years, you've saved £40,000 on tax, and at the same time received an income. So let's refresh how that works. We invest it into a trust, which then purchases an investment bond. We select an income of, these are just the regular numbers we choose, but you can choose more or less, of 2.55 or 7.5%. That is then fixed for the rest of your life. We place the bond into the discounted gift trust. The discount is established, and I'll tell you about that on the next slide. The trust fund itself is then divided into two parts. Your fund, which is the part that comes out on day one, and the beneficiaries fund. It gives you an income for life, and on death, whatever's left over will go to your beneficiaries. And if you've lived 7 years, it's all outside of your estate, including any growth on it. So what is a discount? What does that mean? Well, one of the slight negatives with this type of product is we have to go through a lengthy medical process to work out the odds on you living another 7 years. I know that sounds rather morbid, but that's what it's doing. But Mr. Jones is age 70, he's in good health, he's decided to take 5% withdrawals. So on day one, £45,883 falls outside of his estate, and that's the discount. So if he passed away on day two, he's actually reduced his estate by £45,000. So what does that mean? Well, that means that he's actually helped lower the tax that is going to be paid on his estate, even if he was to pass away the second day. The remaining £55,000 will fall outside of his estate over the next 7 years. And if he does live the full 7 years, the entire amount is outside of his estate. So these types of products are fine, especially if you're happy to give away the capital, receive an income, and at the same time, maybe are slightly concerned that you won't live the full 7 years, because at least you're solving a part of the problem at outset. Now, what happens if you want access to the money? Now, we get asked a lot of the time, well, I want to still be able to take money out. Maybe my grandchildren or children are going to go to university, or they're going to need money to buy a house. Now, with a discounted gift trust, once you've put the money in, you can't take it back out. However, with this type of trust, which is known as a wealth preservation trust, you can. So I'm going to play you a very short video that sort of explains how this type of product works.
We all want to leave as much as possible to our family and loved ones. In the UK, the first £325,000 of an individual's estate is free from inheritance tax. But everything over this could be taxed at 40%. So without careful planning, HMRC could easily become the largest beneficiary of your estate, leaving a large tax bill to settle. The Wealth Preservation Account from Canada Life is one way of generating additional capital for you to use, whilst also reducing your potential inheritance tax liability. By investing in policies which are then held under a flexible reversionary trust, you retain access to flexible yearly payments. Investing in the trust will start a 7-year clock, after which the investment will sit outside of your estate for inheritance tax purposes. And any growth on the money is outside immediately. So how does it work? Let's look at an example. Sally invests £100,000 into the Wealth Preservation Account. She splits this over 10 years, with 5 policies of £2,000 maturing each year. For the first 3 years, Sally has no need for additional income, so the maturing segments are moved to the end of the conveyor belt, creating an 11th, 12th and 13th year. Towards the end of year 4, she wants some extra money to buy a new car. The trustees she has nominated let 2 policies mature, so they fall off the conveyor belt and pay £4,000 plus any growth to Sally. The growth is subject to her marginal income tax rate. The remaining 3 segments are again moved to the end of the conveyor belt, creating a 14th year. At the end of year 5, Sally doesn't require any money, but she's planning to take her family on a worldwide cruise in 18 months' time. So the trustees move 3 of the maturing segments along 1 year, with the remaining 2 segments moved to the end of the conveyor belt to top up year 14. A year later, and Sally and the family are just a few months away from setting sail. The trustees let all 8 segments mature, paying £16,000 plus any growth to Sally. Towards the end of year 7, Sally's daughter Amy turns 18 and is about to start university. Sally would like to help her financially. The trustees can surrender 3 segments and Sally will be taxed on these. Or they can assign the 3 segments to Amy before they surrender them. This way they are assessed on Amy's tax position, and as she has no other income, there could be no tax to pay. The Wealth Preservation Account is designed to be flexible. Even if you don't expect to need the money, it's good to know the options are there should circumstances change. And when that clock reaches 7 years, it's free from inheritance tax on your estate. So the next generation can benefit during your lifetime and long after.
So that short video just gives you an idea about how this type of product works. So the main benefit of this is flexibility. You have the ability to be able to give money to your children or grandchildren if you need it, or once a year if you need to take a segment out, you can do so. So the advantages of this account are after 7 years, of course, it's outside of your estate in exactly the same way as a discounted gift trust. Growth is also outside. The benefits, though, can be paid to the beneficiaries at any time. So if you do need to help out anyone in your family, you can do so. The policies can be assigned to them as well. Additionally, trustees, which will be yourself, have complete control over who benefits from the trust. And there is no medical underwriting required for this type of policy like there is with a discounted gift trust. However, there is one minor or major disadvantage of this, that you do have to live the full 7 years. Unlike with a discounted gift trust, where even if you pass away early, you have some benefit, with this one, if you don't live the full 7 years, you have no inheritance tax benefit whatsoever. So you do need to, it's sort of a 7 years or nothing with this type of policy. So you do need to live those full 7 years. Now, what about something else that maybe we can use in conjunction? And that is called insurance. Now, many of you will have insurance in the room. You may have even had life insurance in the past. If you own your property, you probably had a life insurance policy whilst you were doing the mortgage. And of course, you will all, I imagine, insure your house, your car, because it's a legal right for it. Well, we have to insure our car, and the contents within our houses, everything that we spend our money on. We want to make sure that if the house burnt down, we'd at least be able to replace it. So why don't we just insure the tax bill? Well, we have a saying, which is, would you rather pay tax on the seed or the harvest? So what does that mean? Well, to use a farming terminology here, the harvest for Mr. and Mrs. Jones is when they both passed away, their total estate is worth 1.5 million and is being taxed on the total estate. Now, when we're talking about the seed, that's whilst they're still accumulating, the estate is still there and they're still using it. So we're going to pay them a small monthly amount instead on the seed, so that at the end we don't have to pay anything on the harvest. And which is better to do? Well, I'm going to explain how the life assurance sort of works. Now, Mr. and Mrs. Jones buy a life policy for £260,000. It's £260,000 because that's the amount that they have to pay in inheritance tax. So we purchase that, and then vitally, it has to be wrapped in a trust. If it's not wrapped in a trust, all we're actually doing is, when they pass away, we're going to add £260,000 to their £1.5 million estate, and all that's going to do is increase their current problem. And we don't want to do that. So we need to make sure we wrap a trust around it. And when the second person passes away, what then happens is the children instruct the trust, which the life assurance policy is paid into the trust, they instruct the trust to pay HMRC the £260,000, and then in return the beneficiaries get to keep the full £1.5 million estate. So what that's done is it's helped to keep the money in the family, and it's also pleased HMRC because they've received the money that they are due. Now, this is how much it costs. So £260,000 for a couple aged 70 in good health, non-smokers, whole of life second death, because we don't want to pay it at the first death, and in trust, there's two options. One is called reviewable, which means in a few years' time they're going to be reviewed again, and because of course they're older, it's going to increase dramatically in price, is £249.17 per month. Or you have guaranteed cover. Now, guaranteed cover means that it will remain that price for the rest of their lives, no matter how long they live, and it's £580.45 per month. Now, that may sound quite expensive, but there are ways of funding it. So what we could do is we could set up a discounted gift trust, use the income from it for the first 7 years to pay for the insurance, therefore covering off that side, and then we may not need the life assurance after the 7-year period. And the same goes for the wealth preservation account. We can use some of the capital out of that to help to pay for it. Now, for the guaranteed cover, for Mr. and Mrs. Jones, they need to live 38 years for them to have paid more in premiums than they will in tax. So they'll be 108 by the time they've actually paid more out to the insurance company than they would have received back. So when it comes to life insurance, it's a very easy way of solving it. And really, we generally like to combine the two types of products. So maybe we do a discounted gift trust, that pays for the life assurance, so it's not physically costing you anything, and at the same time is helping to protect your estate so that you don't have to worry about it, and that we ensure that your family don't end up picking up a rather large tax bill.